Deep in the Everglades, long after the sun goes down and the last airboat engines have gone quiet, something moves through the sawgrass that the Burmese pythons cannot see coming, cannot smell, and cannot outrun. It doesn't have eyes built for daylight, it doesn't need them. It hunts entirely by heat, by sound, and by a sense so alien to human biology that scientists spent years trying to fully understand it before they ever thought to weaponize it against the snake invasion swallowing South Florida whole. Florida didn't build this hunter. They released it on purpose into the darkest, wettest, most impenetrable parts of the swamp. And what it's been quietly doing out there ever since is something almost nobody outside the research teams has ever heard about. This is the story of the hunter Florida let loose in the dark. To understand why the state would deliberately release a predator into an already collapsing ecosystem, you have to understand exactly how badly the Burmese python has broken the Everglades. This is a wetland that stretches across 1.5 million acres, one of the most ecologically important landscapes in North America. And for the last 3 decades, it has been quietly devoured from the inside by a snake that was never supposed to be there. Burmese pythons entered the Everglades through the exotic pet trade of the 1980s and 90s, when hatchlings small enough to fit in a child's palm were sold in Florida pet stores as novelty animals. Those hatchlings grew, some past 20 feet in length, and owners who never anticipated raising an apex predator in a spare bedroom began releasing them into canals and swamps once they became unmanageable. In 1992, Hurricane Andrew tore through South Florida and destroyed a number of reptile breeding facilities, scattering an unknown number of additional snakes into the wild. With no natural predators, an endless warm climate, and prey animals that had never evolved any fear of a python, the population exploded. The damage to native wildlife has been staggering. In areas with the heaviest python presence, populations of raccoons, opossums, and marsh rabbits have collapsed by more than 90%. Bobcat sightings have dropped to almost nothing in some regions. The pythons have been documented swallowing full-grown white-tailed deer, and in some of the most disturbing footage ever captured in the Everglades, locked in fatal combat with alligators, each species trying to consume the other. Biologists now estimate the python population somewhere between the tens of thousands and possibly several 100,000 animals, hidden almost entirely within sawgrass and swamp too thick and too vast for any human search effort to meaningfully cover. Florida had already thrown nearly everything conventional at the problem. Public hunts with cash bounties, licensed contractors patrolling levees at night, radio-tagged female pythons nicknamed Judas snakes, released to lead hunters back to hidden breeding aggregations during mating season. Detection dogs trained to track the python's faint, musky scent trail through the mud. Each approach helped, and each one ran into the same wall. The Everglades is simply too vast, too dense, and too dark for human eyes, human noses, or human patience to ever cover completely. Pythons are ambush predators built for stillness and camouflage, capable of lying motionless in standing water for hours, invisible even to an experienced hunter standing 3 feet away. So researchers turned their attention towards something that had already spent millions of years perfecting the exact skill set humans were missing: hunting effectively in total darkness, underwater, and through dense vegetation, using senses built for exactly this kind of environment. The animal Florida ultimately turned to for this job wasn't some exotic import shipped in from overseas. It was already native to the swamp, already perfectly adapted to it, and already capable of detecting a python's presence in conditions where even trained detection dogs struggled: alligators. For most of the python invasion, alligators and pythons had existed as uneasy, sometimes fatal rivals, two apex predators competing for the same territory and often the same prey. But researchers studying alligator sensory biology had noticed something remarkable. Alligators possess an extraordinarily sensitive array of pressure receptors scattered across their jaws, called dome pressure receptors, capable of detecting the faintest vibrations in water, even a single droplet falling from several feet away. Combined with their ability to detect infrared heat signatures at close range and their willingness to patrol the same dense, waterlogged corridors pythons use to move between hunting grounds, alligators were, without anyone designing them for the job, already one of the most capable python detectors in the entire ecosystem. The program that emerged from this realization was quiet, controversial within research circles, and deliberately kept out of public messaging for years because the optics of a state wildlife agency admitting they were relying on alligators as biological surveillance tools sounded, to the average person, like something out of a horror movie, rather than a legitimate conservation strategy. Researchers began tagging alligators in known python hotspots with GPS transmitters, then cross-referencing their movement data against confirmed python sighting locations. The pattern that emerged was almost eerie in its precision. Alligators were consistently altering their patrol routes toward areas where pythons had recently been active, homing in on the heat and vibration signatures of large constrictors moving through the water, sometimes engaging them directly, sometimes simply forcing them to abandon territory and relocate into corridors where human hunting teams were waiting. Rather than fighting this behavior, Florida's wildlife researchers began actively using it. In select high-density zones, biologists began deliberately encouraging alligator presence, in some cases relocating problem alligators from residential canals, where they'd otherwise likely be euthanized, directly into python hotspots deep in the Everglades interior. It was a strange kind of second life for animals that would have been destroyed anyway, redirected instead into the darkest, densest parts of the swamp, specifically because their senses could do something no human technology had matched. If a story like this is exactly the kind you can't stop thinking about, subscribe now, because what the researchers discovered once they started actually reading the data coming back from these tagged alligators is where this stops sounding strange and starts sounding almost impossible. Cross-referencing years of alligator movement data against confirmed python nest locations revealed something the earlier robotic decoy and detection dog programs had never been able to see. Alligators weren't just occasionally crossing paths with pythons. In several documented cases, tagged alligators had positioned themselves near python nesting sites for days at a time, apparently drawn by the heat signature and vibration of dozens of eggs and, eventually, hatchlings. A live all-you-can-eat buffet, the alligators had located entirely on their own, long before any human research team had mapped that same nest. When biologists finally located and confirmed several of these sites by following the alligator data, they found exactly what the movement patterns had predicted: hidden clusters of python eggs buried deep in vegetation that no visual survey or thermal drone flight had ever detected. The implications were significant. Instead of researchers spending months manually searching 1.5 million acres of sawgrass for python breeding grounds, alligator movement data was functioning as a live, self-updating map of where pythons were most active and most vulnerable, built entirely from an animal that was already living in the swamp, already patrolling it every night, and already equipped with senses evolved specifically for hunting in total darkness. Florida wildlife officials began quietly expanding the tagging program, fitting more alligators across more python-dense regions with long-range transmitters, treating the state's own apex predator as a living surveillance network stretched invisibly across the entire wetland. There's something genuinely unsettling about the idea once you sit with it. Out there right now, somewhere in the Everglades, in water too dark and too dense for any human to safely enter at night, an alligator wearing a small transmitter is moving silently toward a heat signature it detected through pressure receptors in its own jaw, tracking a 20-foot python that has no idea anything is coming, using senses that evolved millions of years before either species had any reason to compete for the same swamp. Florida didn't build this hunter in a lab. They didn't need to. It had been living in the Everglades the entire time, waiting, in the dark, for someone to finally start listening to what it already knew. So what do you think Florida should do next with what the alligators have been quietly revealing all along? Drop your answer in the comments. And if a story like this is exactly the kind you go looking for, subscribe for more unbelievable but true stories exactly like this one every single week.